What I'm about to share with you happened during the darkest chapter of my entire existence, when I believed that my heart would never heal, that my faith had been shattered beyond repair, and that God had turned his back on me in my most desperate hour of need. But what occurred on that miraculous evening of November 15th, 2006, didn't just change my understanding of death and eternal life. It completely transformed my perspective on suffering, divine mercy, and the extraordinary ways that heaven communicates with those of us still walking this earth. Before I dive into this testimony that has remained sacred in the depths of my soul for years, I want to connect with you personally. Where are you watching from right now? Are you perhaps walking through your own valley of despair? Or do you know someone who's struggling with an unimaginable loss that seems to have no purpose or meaning? Please leave a comment and tell me which corner of the world you're joining me from, because this story of supernatural hope needs to reach hearts that are navigating their own storms of grief and confusion. And if something deep within your spirit is telling you that this testimony might shift your perspective on pain, loss, and the reality of heaven's intervention in our earthly struggles, please hit that subscribe button right now, because what you're about to hear could be the breakthrough you've been desperately seeking in the midst of your own trial. My name is Isabella Romano. I'm 43 years old. I'm an art teacher at a prestigious private school in Rome, and I'm the mother of what was my entire world, my son, Marco, who was 11 years old when God called him home in the most unexpected and devastating way imaginable. Until that fateful day in October 2006, my faith had been comfortable and predictable. I attended Sunday Mass regularly, participated in parish activities occasionally, and believed in God with the quiet, unquestioning trust that characterizes many Italian Catholic families who have inherited their faith through generations rather than through personal crisis or profound spiritual experience. My life was beautifully organized around my passion for teaching Renaissance art to bright young minds, nurturing Marco's growth and development, and the dreams that every mother constructs about her child's future, his education, his career possibilities, his eventual family, and all the wonderful experiences we would share together as he matured into adulthood. I had everything mapped out with the confidence of someone who believed that tragedy happened to other people, not to families who prayed regularly, lived morally, and contributed positively to their communities. Marco was an extraordinary child, bursting with creativity, insatiable curiosity about everything from ancient Roman history to modern computer technology, and a natural kindness that touched everyone who encountered him. He was the type of boy who helped elderly neighbors carry their groceries, who shared his art supplies with classmates who couldn't afford their own, and who had a special gift for making shy children feel included and valued. He loved drawing comic book characters, playing soccer with the neighborhood kids, and had developed a fascinating obsession with learning about saints and their stories, often asking me to tell him tales about young martyrs and holy children throughout church history. The accident happened on a rainy Thursday afternoon in October 2006, when Marco was returning from his after-school art club where he had been working on a special project about medieval religious paintings. He was walking through the crosswalk near our apartment building when a delivery truck driver, rushing to complete his route before the evening deadline, ran a red light at dangerous speed. Marco was following all the safety rules I had taught him religiously, looking both ways and staying within the painted lines. But the impact was so severe that the emergency responders told me later he would have died instantly without any awareness of pain or fear. The following days became a surreal nightmare of funeral arrangements, condolence visits from well-meaning friends and relatives, and a devastating reality that my mind kept rejecting as some kind of terrible mistake that would surely be corrected by divine intervention. People filled our home with flowers, casseroles, and comforting words that sounded hollow against the deafening roar of anguish that had taken up permanent residence in my chest. I stopped eating regular meals, sleeping through the night, or finding meaning in any of the daily activities that had previously given my life structure and purpose. My faith, which had been my foundation for 43 years, suddenly felt like a cruel deception that had given me false security about God's goodness and protection over innocent children. During the first month after Marco's funeral, I fell into such a deep depression that my colleagues at school began to worry about my ability to continue teaching. I couldn't look at my students' artwork without seeing Marco's creative spirit in every piece, couldn't discuss religious paintings without feeling rage toward a God who had allowed such beauty to be destroyed so senselessly. The nights became endless marathons of tears and furious questions directed toward a silent heaven that seemed indifferent to my maternal agony. Why my son? Why such a gentle, creative, loving child who had brought nothing but joy and light into the world? Where was the divine protection I had trusted in throughout my entire life? How could a supposedly loving God allow innocent children to suffer while criminals and selfish people lived long, comfortable lives? It was during one of those sleepless nights when my grief was so overwhelming that I seriously considered whether life was worth continuing without Marco, that something happened which would forever change my understanding of death, heaven, and God's mysterious ways of communicating His love to broken hearts. I was sitting in Marco's bedroom, surrounded by his unfinished drawings, his collection of saint prayer cards, and the art supplies that still smelled like his favorite grape-scented markers, when I suddenly felt a presence so powerful and comforting that I instinctively looked up toward the ceiling of the room. What I witnessed defies every rational explanation, but I must attempt to describe it because I know with absolute certainty that it wasn't a hallucination caused by grief, but rather an extraordinary grace that God granted to a devastated mother to restore her faith and will to live. The ceiling of Marco's bedroom had somehow transformed into a transparent window, revealing a dimension of indescribable light and beauty that my earthly eyes had never been designed to perceive. Within this heavenly vision, I saw my beloved son being tenderly held by two figures that I recognized immediately, despite having never experienced any kind of mystical encounter or supernatural phenomenon in my entire life. To Marco's right stood the Blessed Virgin Mary, appearing exactly as she does in the classical paintings I had taught my students about for years, but radiating a maternal tenderness and divine luminosity that no human artist could ever capture on canvas. Her face glowed with such perfect love and compassion that I felt as if I were being embraced by the most secure and comforting presence in the universe. To Marco's left was a teenager I didn't initially recognize, but whose presence emanated such pure joy and authentic holiness that I immediately smiled through my tears for the first time since the accident. He was dressed in completely modern clothing, blue jeans, white sneakers, and a casual pullover sweater, and his smile reminded me instantly of Marco's own, spontaneous, genuine, and filled with the light that only truly innocent hearts possess. His eyes sparkled with wisdom that seemed far beyond his apparent 15 or 16 years, and there was something in his demeanor that made me feel immediately connected to him, as if I had known him my entire life. But what took my breath away completely was seeing my Marco nestled safely between these two celestial figures. He looked exactly as I remembered him, but transformed in a way that's impossible to describe using earthly language. His face still had the same mischievous and loving expression I knew so well, but now it was illuminated with a peace and happiness that I had never seen in him during his earthly life. There were no traces of the accident, no signs of suffering or fear, only the pure essence of my child, radiating an overwhelming joy that seemed to flow from the very center of his being. The three of them were connected by streams of golden light that moved between them like visible rivers of love, and I could see that Marco felt completely secure and cherished in a way that surpassed anything I had been able to provide for him during his life on earth. The Virgin Mary had her protective hand resting gently on my son's shoulder, while the unknown teenager had his arm around Marco in the caring way that an older brother looks after a younger sibling. In that moment, without anyone speaking audible words, I received a message that came directly to my maternal heart in a communication that was clearer and more definitive than any conversation I had ever experienced in my life. It was as if all three of them were speaking in perfect unison directly to my wounded soul. Isabella, Your son is safe, he is joyful, and he is exactly where he needs to be. The accident wasn't a punishment or a mistake. It was simply the moment that God had chosen to call him home to fulfill a special mission that only Marco could accomplish in heaven. He is loved, protected, and growing in wisdom and love in ways that transcend all earthly limitations. The vision lasted perhaps 10 minutes, but during that time I felt as if I were being healed from the inside out, as if every fiber of my being that had been shattered by grief was being restored by a force of love more powerful than any medicine or therapy that human wisdom could provide. When the image began to fade gradually, Marco looked directly into my eyes and sent me a final message that will remain engraved in my heart until the day I am reunited with him. Mama, don't cry for me anymore. I'm happy here. I'm learning incredible things, and I'm helping other children who arrive scared and confused. God has given me important work to do with my new friend. And someday you'll understand that this is so much better than anything we could have imagined. I love you always, and I'll be waiting for you when your time comes. After the vision disappeared completely, I remained sitting on Marco's bedroom floor for hours, weeping, but these were tears of relief, gratitude, and a supernatural peace that surpassed all human understanding. For the first time since the accident, I could breathe deeply without feeling like my lungs were filled with shattered glass. The pain of physical separation hadn't vanished, but it had been transformed into something entirely different. A longing filled with hope instead of meaningless despair. During the following days, I became consumed with discovering the identity of the teenager I had seen caring for Marco alongside the Virgin Mary. Something about his appearance and presence felt familiar, as if I had encountered his image before, but I couldn't place where or when. I described the vision in detail to my sister Francesca, who has always been much more knowledgeable about saints and Catholic devotions than I am, and it was she who suggested that I might have seen a young saint, perhaps someone with a special connection to children or modern technology. It was when I began researching young contemporary saints that I stumbled upon photographs and videos of Carlo Acutis. The moment I saw his image, my heart leapt with immediate recognition. It was definitely him, without any doubt whatsoever, the teenager I had seen lovingly caring for my son alongside the Blessed Mother. Every detail of his face, his characteristic smile, even the casual way he dressed, corresponded exactly with what I had witnessed during the heavenly vision. If this revelation is stirring something profound in your heart right now, if you're battling your own devastating loss, or you know someone who is walking through the valley of grief, don't continue without taking action. Hit that subscribe button at this moment, because what comes next in this story might bring healing to wounds you thought could never be mended. And in the comments section, please share with me. Have you ever experienced a dream, vision, or supernatural sign that brought comfort during a moment of unbearable loss? Your testimony could be exactly the hope that another mother, another father, or anyone in mourning needs to hear today. The discovery that I had witnessed Blessed Carlo Acutis caring for my son led me into a deep investigation of his life, his death at 15 from leukemia, and the miracles that had been attributed to his intercession. As I read about his devotion to the Eucharist, his passion for computer technology, and especially his compassion toward children and teenagers who suffered, I began to understand why God had chosen this young saint to care for Marco in heaven. Carlo had died of a fulminant illness at an age similar to my son's, and he had faced his own death with a faith and serenity that had amazed everyone who knew him. He had dedicated his final days to consoling other sick children and their families, even using his knowledge of computers to create presentations that would give them hope about eternal life. Reading about his life felt like discovering that God had prepared the perfect companion for my son. Someone who understood what it meant to be young, who shared similar interests in technology and modern culture, and who had the heart to care for other children who arrived in heaven before their time. During the weeks following the vision, I began experiencing changes in my daily life that I could only attribute to the combined intercession of Carlo, the Virgin Mary, and my own son from heaven. The physical pain of grief, which had been so intense that I often couldn't get out of bed, began to gradually ease. It didn't disappear completely, but it transformed into something more manageable, as if I were being sustained by invisible forces that gave me the strength necessary for each day. My ability to work with students at school also transformed dramatically. Before the vision, being around children Marco's age had caused me overwhelming distress because they reminded me constantly of what I had lost. But after the heavenly encounter, I began to see each of my students as someone under the special protection of Carlo and Marco. When I taught lessons about religious art, I felt a comforting presence that allowed me to offer a type of inspiration and hope that went beyond my natural teaching abilities. One afternoon, while discussing a Renaissance painting of angels with my advanced art class, something extraordinary happened that confirmed the reality of what I had experienced. I was explaining the symbolism of angels caring for children in classical religious art when one of my students, a typically reserved 12-year-old named Giulia, raised her hand with an unusual urgency. "Professoressa Romano," she said with a serious expression that seemed far beyond her years, "I had a dream about your son Marco last night. He was with a teenager in modern clothes, and they were both painting the most beautiful pictures I've ever seen. The teenager said his name was Carlo, and he told me to tell you that Marco is learning how to paint with colors that don't exist on Earth, and that he wants you to know that all the art you taught him is helping him create masterpieces in heaven." The classroom fell completely silent, and I felt as if my knees were going to give way beneath me. Giulia had never met Marco. She had enrolled in my class after the accident, and I had never mentioned his name or discussed my personal situation with my students. Yet somehow, this innocent child had received a message that was clearly meant for me, delivered through a dream that contained details she couldn't possibly have known. After class, I asked Giulia to describe what she had seen in more detail. Her description of Marco was absolutely accurate, down to the small scar on his left hand from a childhood accident. But even more remarkable was her description of Carlo, which matched perfectly with the photographs I had been studying. She described his jeans, his sneakers, his warm smile, and most incredibly, she mentioned that he had been showing Marco something on what looked like a computer made of light. This experience with Giulia was the first of many that convinced me that the vision had been real and had a specific purpose beyond my own consolation. Over the following months, I began to experience what I can only describe as a supernatural ability to recognize children who were struggling with their own grief or fear of death. During my classes, I would sometimes feel a gentle interior prompting to approach certain students who seemed sad or withdrawn. And invariably, these children would open up to me about their fears, losses, or spiritual questions. One such student was a 10-year-old boy named Alessandro, whose grandfather had recently died from cancer. Alessandro had become increasingly disruptive in class and had stopped participating in group activities. When I felt prompted to speak with him privately after class one day, he broke down in tears and confessed that he was terrified that his grandfather was suffering somewhere and that death might be painful and frightening. I felt inspired to share with Alessandro, in age-appropriate language, the story of Carlo Acutis and how he had helped other children understand that heaven was a place of incredible beauty and joy. I didn't mention my own vision explicitly, but I told him about Carlo's love for computers and how he had used technology to help people understand God's love. That very evening, Alessandro's mother called me with excitement and amazement. Her son had come home from school and announced that he wasn't worried about his grandfather anymore because a saint named Carlo had visited him during rest time and shown him his grandfather playing football with other grandfathers in a beautiful garden. According to Alessandro, Carlo had explained that death wasn't scary at all. It was just like moving to a new house where everything was perfect and everyone was happy. The mother was astounded because Alessandro had never heard the name Carlo Acutis before our conversation. Yet he was able to describe the saint's appearance in detail that matched the photographs his family later found online. Even more remarkably, Alessandro mentioned that Carlo had been accompanied by another boy who looked a little like me, a description that could have easily matched Marco. These experiences multiplied over the following months, creating a pattern that I couldn't ignore or attribute to coincidence. Students who had never heard of Carlo Acutis began mentioning dreams or experiences involving a teenage saint who helped children understand death and heaven. Several parents contacted me to share similar stories, and word began to spread in our school community about what people started calling the miracle teacher who helps children overcome their fear of death. My personal relationship with Carlo Acutis deepened significantly during this period. I began praying for his intercession daily, not only for my own healing process, but for all the children and families I encountered who were struggling with loss or fear. The responses to these prayers were so consistent and specific that other teachers in my school began to notice what they called the Isabella effect in our educational environment. Children in my classes seemed to experience less anxiety about life's difficult questions, more hope when facing family problems, and an inexplicable peace even when dealing with challenging situations. Parents reported feeling more comforted after speaking with me during parent conferences, even when I wasn't explicitly sharing spiritual content. It was as if the grace I had received was being multiplied and distributed through my daily work with young people. One particularly powerful experience occurred during the spring term when I encountered a family situation that would forever change my understanding of how heaven communicates with earth through the intercession of young saints. A new student named Lucia had enrolled in my art class after her family moved to Rome from northern Italy, following the sudden death of her older brother, who had died in a skiing accident at the age of 16. Lucia, who was 13, had not spoken a single word to any teacher or student since arriving at our school 6 weeks earlier, and her parents were desperately concerned about her psychological state. During art class, Lucia would sit silently at her desk, staring at blank paper without making any attempt to participate in the creative exercises I assigned. When other students tried to engage her in conversation, she would simply turn away or leave the room. The school counselor had tried multiple approaches to help her process her grief, but nothing seemed to penetrate the wall of silence she had constructed around herself. One afternoon, while the class was working on self-portraits, I felt a strong interior prompting to sit beside Lucia and begin drawing on a piece of paper while talking to her gently about how art could help express feelings that were too difficult to put into words. As I sketched, I found myself drawing the figure of a teenager in modern clothing, and before I realized what I was doing, I had created a remarkably accurate portrait of Carlo Acutis, complete with his characteristic smile and casual attire. Lucia, who had been ignoring me completely, suddenly looked down at my drawing and gasped audibly. It was the first sound anyone had heard her make since arriving at our school. Tears began streaming down her face as she pointed at the drawing and whispered, "That's him. That's the boy who came to see me the night after my brother died. He told me his name was Carlo, and he said that my brother wasn't afraid anymore because he was teaching him how to use computers in heaven." The entire classroom fell silent as Lucia continued speaking for the first time in weeks. Carlo told me that my brother's accident wasn't his fault, and that God had called him home because heaven needed young people who could help other teenagers understand that dying isn't the end of everything. He said that my brother was learning how to be a guardian angel for kids who were scared about death, just like he used to be scared about everything when he was alive. Lucia's transformation from that moment forward was nothing short of miraculous. She began participating actively in class discussions, created some of the most beautiful and expressive artwork I had ever seen from a student her age, and became a source of comfort and wisdom for other students who were dealing with their own losses or fears. Her parents were amazed by the change and credited her healing to what they called the miracle of meeting the right teacher at the right moment. But the experience that most profoundly impacted me occurred later that same month, when Lucia brought her parents to meet me after school one day. Her father, a successful businessman who had been struggling with his own faith after his son's death, shared something that sent chills down my spine. He told me that on the night of their son's funeral, both he and his wife had experienced the same dream simultaneously, something that had never happened to them in 20 years of marriage. In the dream, they had seen their deceased son standing in a beautiful place surrounded by light, accompanied by a teenager in casual clothes who was showing him something on what appeared to be a luminous computer screen. The teenager had introduced himself as Carlo and explained that he had been assigned by God to help young people who died unexpectedly to adjust to their new existence in heaven. According to the dream, their son was already helping Carlo create presentations that would comfort families on earth who were mourning the loss of children and teenagers. What made this account extraordinary was that Lucia's parents had never heard of Carlo Acutis before their son's death, and they described details about his appearance and personality that perfectly matched both historical accounts and my own vision. They mentioned his love for computers, his modern clothing style, his warm smile, and most remarkably, his specific mission of caring for young people who arrived in heaven before completing their earthly lives. Through Lucia's family, I was introduced to a network of parents across Italy who had experienced similar supernatural encounters involving Carlo Acutis and their deceased children. Each family's story was unique, but the patterns were unmistakable. Carlo consistently appeared as a caring older brother figure who helped young souls adjust to heaven while providing comfort to their grieving families on earth. During this same period, I began receiving what I can only describe as assignments during my daily prayers before a small shrine I had created in Marco's room. These weren't audible voices, but clear interior promptings that would direct me to reach out to specific families, share particular stories, or visit certain places where my testimony might bring healing. One such assignment led me to contact a family in Naples whose 14-year-old daughter had died from bone cancer the previous year. When I called the Benedetti family and shared my story, the mother immediately began crying with joy rather than sadness. She told me that for months she had been praying specifically for God to send her a sign that her daughter Francesca was safe and happy in heaven. The night before my call, she had dreamed of Francesca painting beautiful pictures alongside two other figures, a young man in modern clothes and a boy who looked about 11 years old. In the dream, Francesca had told her mother that she was learning about art from a computer expert saint named Carlo, and a new friend named Marco, whose mother is an art teacher. The daughter had specifically mentioned that Marco's mother would contact them soon with a message of hope, and that this contact would be the sign her mother had been praying for. The precision and specificity of these supernatural communications convinced me that I was witnessing something far beyond individual consolation experiences. It seemed that Carlo Acutis had received a heavenly mission specifically related to young people who died prematurely, and that this mission included providing evidential comfort to their families through dreams, visions, and miraculous connections between survivors. My own role in this divine network became clearer as more families contacted me with similar experiences. I realized that God was using my background as an educator and my personal experience of loss to serve as a bridge between heaven and earth, helping other parents understand that their children were not only safe, but actively engaged in meaningful work in the afterlife. The most prophetic and extraordinary aspect of my journey with Carlo Acutis began during the summer of 2006, just months before his earthly life would end. Though I had no way of knowing at the time that our supernatural connection would soon take on even deeper significance. During my daily prayers in Marco's room, which had become my personal sanctuary and place of communion with heaven, I began receiving what I can only describe as detailed visions of future events that would involve Carlo's death, his beatification process, and the global impact his intercession would have on families who had lost children. These weren't fleeting impressions or wishful thinking, but vivid, documentary-style visions that unfolded like watching a movie about events that had not yet occurred. In these extraordinary experiences, I saw Carlo's final illness, witnessed his peaceful death surrounded by family, and observed the miraculous events that would follow his passing. Most remarkably, I saw myself years in the future, standing before church officials and sharing testimony about Carlo's intercession for bereaved families around the world. The first of these prophetic visions occurred on a warm evening in June 2006. While praying my rosary before Marco's photographs, I suddenly felt transported to what appeared to be a hospital room, where I could see a teenage boy lying peacefully in bed, surrounded by family members who were praying quietly. Although I had never seen Carlo Acutis in person at that time, I knew instinctively that I was witnessing his final earthly moments. What struck me most powerfully was the supernatural peace that filled the room and the visible presence of angelic beings surrounding his bed. In the vision, I could see Carlo speaking to someone invisible to his earthly family, and though I couldn't hear his words, I somehow understood that he was receiving instructions about his future mission in heaven. He appeared to be accepting a specific assignment related to caring for children who would die young and comforting their families through supernatural signs and intercession. The scene was filled with such divine love and purposefulness that I felt privileged to witness this sacred transition from earthly life to heavenly mission. Over the following weeks, these prophetic experiences continued with increasing frequency and detail. I saw Carlo's funeral, attended by hundreds of young people who had been touched by his example of joyful faith. I witnessed the beginning of devotion to him that would spread throughout Italy and eventually around the world. Most personally significant, I saw myself meeting other mothers who had lost children, sharing stories of Carlo's intercession, and participating in what appeared to be official church investigations into miraculous events connected to his intervention. One particularly detailed vision showed me a future scene where I was standing in an ornate Vatican office, speaking to church officials about documented cases of Carlo's supernatural assistance to bereaved families. In this vision, I could see filing cabinets filled with testimonies from around the world, all describing similar experiences of comfort, signs, and miraculous healings that had occurred through Carlo's intercession. The officials in the vision were examining medical records, psychiatric evaluations, and detailed witness statements that supported the authenticity of these supernatural interventions. What made these visions even more extraordinary was that they included specific details about events and people I had never encountered in my life. I saw families from countries I had never visited, speaking languages I didn't understand, yet I somehow comprehended their stories of loss and subsequent comfort through Carlo's intervention. I witnessed medical miracles, psychological healings, and spiritual transformations that would occur years in the future through the prayer and intercession of this young saint. The most personally meaningful vision occurred in late September 2006, when I saw myself many years in the future, now with gray hair and wearing different clothes, standing in what appeared to be a large church filled with thousands of people. I was sharing my testimony about Marco's death and my subsequent visions of him with Carlo, and the audience was responding with tears of recognition and hope. In this prophetic scene, I could see that many of the people listening had their own experiences of supernatural comfort through Carlo's intercession. During this same period, I began experiencing what I can only describe as direct spiritual communication with Carlo himself, even though he was still alive and living in Milan. These weren't audible conversations, but clear interior dialogues where I would receive answers to questions I was pondering about suffering, faith, and God's purposes in allowing young people to die. The wisdom that came through these communications far exceeded anything I could have generated from my own knowledge or imagination. In one of these spiritual conversations, Carlo explained to me that God had chosen certain young people throughout history to have abbreviated earthly lives specifically so they could serve special missions in heaven that required their youthful energy, optimism, and ability to relate to others their age. According to this communication, children and teenagers who died prematurely weren't victims of tragedy, but rather souls who had been selected for accelerated spiritual advancement and heavenly ministry. Carlo also revealed to me that his earthly passion for computer technology had been preparation for his heavenly work of using divine technology to communicate with families on earth. He explained that in heaven, the saints had access to communication methods that transcended physical limitations, allowing them to appear in dreams, create coincidences, and manifest signs that would provide comfort and confirmation to those who needed heavenly intervention. Most remarkably, Carlo communicated to me that Marco had been chosen specifically to work with him in this ministry because my son's artistic talents would be essential for creating beautiful visions and signs that would reach people through their aesthetic and emotional sensibilities. According to this revelation, Marco's death had not been a random accident, but rather the completion of his earthly preparation for a specialized mission that required his particular gifts and personality. These prophetic communications reached their climax in early October 2006, when I received a final, extraordinarily detailed vision of Carlo's approaching death and the immediate aftermath. I saw the exact date, October 12th, and I witnessed the peaceful circumstances of his passing. More importantly, I saw the moment when his soul was reunited with Marco and other young saints in heaven, and I observed their immediate collaboration in beginning the ministry that would touch families around the world. In this culminating vision, Carlo turned directly toward me and communicated a final message that I will never forget. Isabella, everything you have experienced has been preparation for the work we will do together after my earthly life ends. Your pain has been transformed into purpose, and your loss has become the foundation for a ministry that will bring hope to thousands of families. When you hear about my death, don't grieve, because it will mark the beginning of even more powerful interventions in the lives of those who need to understand that death is not the end, but simply a transition to a different kind of existence. On the morning of October 12, 2006, I awakened with an unusual sense of anticipation mixed with sadness, as if something momentous was about to occur that would forever change the spiritual landscape of my life. Throughout the prophetic visions I had been receiving over the previous months, this date had appeared repeatedly as significant, and I had been both dreading and awaiting its arrival with the conflicted emotions of someone who knows that profound change often comes through profound loss. As I went about my normal morning routine, preparing for school, reviewing lesson plans about Baroque religious paintings, and having my usual quiet breakfast, I felt a strange interior prompting to spend extra time in prayer before Marco's shrine. While kneeling before his photographs and the collection of saint prayer cards he had accumulated during his short life, I experienced what I can only describe as a supernatural preparation for receiving momentous news. The phone call came at 3:47 in the afternoon, just as I was finishing my last class of the day. It was my sister Francesca calling from Milan, where she had been visiting friends. Her voice was filled with emotion as she told me that a 15-year-old boy named Carlo Acutis had died that morning from leukemia, and that his death was already being discussed throughout Catholic communities in Milan as the passing of a potential saint. Despite having anticipated this moment through my visions, hearing the actual news felt like a physical blow to my chest. Even though I had never met Carlo personally during his earthly life, the spiritual connection I had developed with him through our supernatural communications made his death feel like losing another family member. Yet simultaneously, I felt an inexplicable sense of hope and anticipation, as if a new chapter in my spiritual journey was about to begin. That evening, as I prayed before Marco's shrine with tears of grief for Carlo's family and tears of gratitude for all he had already meant to me, the most extraordinary experience of my entire life began to unfold. The room gradually filled with a luminosity that seemed to emanate from within the walls themselves, and I found myself once again in the presence of supernatural visitors who would confirm everything I had seen in my prophetic visions. First, I saw Marco appear exactly as I remembered him from my original vision months earlier. But now he was accompanied by another figure that I recognized immediately as Carlo Acutis. Carlo appeared exactly as he had in the photographs I had studied. But now he was radiating the same divine light and peaceful joy that characterized all the blessed souls I had encountered in my supernatural experiences. But what happened next exceeded every vision I had previously received. Both Marco and Carlo approached me directly, and for the first time in any of my supernatural encounters, they spoke to me in clearly audible voices that were more beautiful and harmonious than any earthly music I had ever heard. Carlo spoke first, his voice filled with joy and enthusiasm. "Isabella, my earthly mission is complete, and now the real work begins. Everything you experienced over the past year was preparation for what we will accomplish together, now that I can work from heaven without the limitations of physical illness or earthly time constraints. Marco and I have been given authorization to minister specifically to families who have lost children, and you have been chosen as our primary earthly collaborator in this mission." Marco then added, with the same sweet voice I remembered, but now enhanced with supernatural wisdom, "Mama, you see how God took what seemed like the worst thing that could happen and used it to prepare you for the most important work of your life. Carlo and I can reach other children in heaven, but we need you to reach their parents and families on earth. Through your testimony and the experiences we will make possible, thousands of families will find hope in their darkest moments." Carlo continued, "In the coming years, you will receive visits from families from around the world who have heard about the supernatural comfort available through our intercession. Your home will become a place of pilgrimage for parents seeking signs that their children are safe and happy in heaven. We will provide these signs through dreams, visions, miraculous coincidences, and physical manifestations that will be undeniable evidence of continued existence after death." The conversation continued for what felt like hours, during which Carlo and Marco explained the detailed mechanics of how their heavenly ministry would operate. They described how they would appear in dreams to comfort grieving children and parents, how they would create synchronicities and signs that would provide specific messages from deceased children to their families, and how they would work through people like me who had been prepared through their own loss to serve as bridges between heaven and earth. Most remarkably, they shared with me a vision of the future impact their ministry would have over the coming decades. I saw Carlo's beatification in 2020, witnessed the global spread of devotion to him among young people, and observed thousands of documented miraculous interventions attributed to his intercession. I saw myself years in the future, now an elderly woman, still receiving families and sharing testimonies that would contribute to Carlo's eventual canonization as a saint. Before the vision concluded, Carlo gave me specific instructions about documenting every supernatural experience that would occur in the coming years. He explained that these testimonies would serve not only to comfort individual families, but also to provide evidence for the Church's investigation into his intercession and eventual sainthood. He asked me to maintain detailed records of every vision, dream, healing, and miraculous sign that families would report, creating an archive that would demonstrate the consistency and authenticity of his supernatural ministry. Marco's final words to me during this extraordinary encounter were both comforting and challenging. "Mama, your grief is being transformed into a gift that will heal thousands of other mothers and fathers. Every tear you cried for me is becoming a source of hope for someone else who thinks their pain will never end. Carlo and I will never leave you alone in this mission. Every time you need strength or guidance, just call our names in prayer, and we will provide exactly what you need to help the next family that God sends to you." As the vision gradually faded and I found myself alone in Marco's room, I felt fundamentally changed from the person I had been just hours earlier. The devastating grief that had defined my existence since Marco's death had been completely transformed into a sense of divine purpose and supernatural hope that filled every cell of my being. I understood clearly that my personal tragedy had been the preparation for a ministry that would touch lives around the world, and that Carlo's death marked not an ending, but the beginning of the most meaningful work of my entire life. Today, 18 years after that transformative October evening when Carlo Acutis began his heavenly ministry, and 5 years after his beatification in Assisi, my life has become a living testament to how God can transform the most devastating loss into a source of supernatural hope and healing for countless families around the world. What began as my personal journey through unbearable grief has evolved into a global ministry that has touched more than 15,000 families across 6 continents, demonstrating that even our deepest tragedies can become instruments of divine mercy when we allow God to work through our broken hearts. The small shrine in Marco's room has grown into an official pilgrimage destination recognized by the Diocese of Rome, where families travel from every corner of the globe seeking the comfort and signs that so many others have found here. The Church has documented over 300 miraculous interventions that have occurred during visits to our home, ranging from spontaneous healings of depression and despair to extraordinary spiritual experiences that have provided undeniable evidence of continued existence after death. Carlo's intercession, working through the communion of young saints in heaven, including my beloved Marco, has resulted in a phenomenon that theologians are studying as evidence of what they call accelerated sanctification through youthful martyrdom. The cases of supernatural intervention have been so numerous and well documented that the Vatican has established a special commission to investigate Carlo's specific mission related to children who die prematurely and their grieving families. My personal transformation continues to deepen with each passing year. The crushing despair that once made me question God's existence has been completely replaced by an unshakable faith in the reality of eternal life and the active involvement of heaven in our earthly struggles. Every morning when I wake up, I feel the presence of Marco and Carlo guiding my activities, showing me which families need attention and which testimonies need to be shared with specific individuals who are struggling with their own losses. The work has expanded far beyond providing comfort to individual families. Young people who have been saved from suicide through encounters with Carlo have formed an international organization called Carlo's Digital Angels, which uses modern technology exactly as Carlo would have wanted, to spread hope and demonstrate that life has meaning and purpose even in the midst of suffering. These young adults create online communities, develop apps for mental health support, and use virtual reality to help grieving families experience simulated reunions with their deceased children. One of the most extraordinary developments has been the emergence of what we call the Children's Network, a supernatural communication system through which deceased children work together with Carlo to provide specific messages and signs to their families on Earth. Families from around the world report remarkably similar experiences. Dreams in which their children appear alongside Carlo, explaining their heavenly activities and providing detailed information that only they could know, serving as undeniable proof of their continued existence and happiness. Maria Santos from Brazil writes every month to share updates about her ongoing communication with her son Pedro, who died in a motorcycle accident at age 16. Through dreams facilitated by Carlo's intercession, Pedro has provided his family with specific information about extended relatives they had lost touch with, helped them make important financial decisions by warning them about failed investments, and even guided them to discover medical conditions early enough for successful treatment. These communications are so detailed and accurate that Maria's family doctor has begun documenting them as evidence of supernatural intervention in medical care. The Kowalski family from Poland experienced something even more extraordinary. Their 14-year-old daughter Anna, who died from brain cancer, began appearing to her younger siblings in shared dreams, where she taught them advanced mathematics concepts that they had never learned in school. When their teachers tested the children on this knowledge, they performed at university level, despite being only 8 and 10 years old. Anna explained through these dreams that Carlo had given her permission to help her siblings excel academically as proof to their parents that education continues in heaven and that death is simply a transition to a different kind of learning. Perhaps the most documented case in our archives involves the Thompson family from England, whose son James died in a school shooting at age 15. Through Carlo's intercession, James began appearing to other teenagers who were contemplating violence, showing them the devastating impact their actions would have not only on their victims, but on their own spiritual development. Over the past 3 years, 12 separate incidents of planned school violence have been prevented when potential perpetrators received visits from James, guided by Carlo, that changed their hearts and minds completely. The technological aspect of Carlo's ministry has manifested in ways that perfectly reflect his earthly passion for computers and digital communication. Families consistently report electronic devices behaving in impossible ways that provide specific messages from their deceased children. Phones display photos that were never stored in their memory, computers type messages without human input, and music playlists appear spontaneously featuring songs that were meaningful to children who have died. Sarah and Michael Chen from Singapore documented the most extraordinary technological miracle in our files. Their son David, who died in a swimming accident at age 13, began communicating with them through their smart home system. Every evening at 7:30 p.m., the exact time David used to call them for dinner, their home automation system would activate in a specific sequence that spelled out messages in Morse code. Over 6 months, David provided them with detailed instructions that led to the discovery of a rare genetic condition in their younger daughter, allowing for treatment that saved her life. The impact of this ministry extends beyond individual families to influence broader understanding of death, afterlife, and the communion of saints within the Catholic Church and other Christian denominations. Seminary professors now assign study of our documented cases as part of coursework on contemporary sainthood, and several Protestant denominations have begun reconsidering their theological positions on intercession of saints based on the evidential nature of the experiences we have recorded. My role in all of this continues to evolve according to what I understand to be direct guidance from Carlo and Marco. I have written 4 books documenting these supernatural interventions, contributed to numerous academic studies on contemporary religious experiences, and speak regularly at international conferences on grief counseling, spiritual healing, and evidence for life after death. But the most meaningful aspect of my work remains the intimate, personal encounters with individual families who arrive at our door carrying the same devastating pain I once carried, and leave with the same supernatural hope that has transformed my existence. Dr. Roberto Castelli, a psychiatrist from the University of Rome who has been studying our ministry for 5 years, recently published research indicating that families who experience supernatural comfort through Carlo's intercession show measurable improvement in brain chemistry related to depression and anxiety within weeks of their encounters. His studies suggest that these spiritual experiences create neurological changes that are equivalent to the most effective pharmaceutical interventions for grief-related mental health conditions. If this testimony has touched your heart today, if you are walking through your own valley of loss, or you know someone whose world has been shattered by the death of a child, I invite you to take a step toward hope. Begin asking Carlo Acutis to intercede for you in whatever struggle you are facing. You don't need to believe every detail of my story to experience his powerful intercession. You simply need to open your heart to the possibility that God continues to work miracles through the saints in ways that transcend our limited human understanding. Before you finish watching this testimony, please subscribe to this channel and share this video with someone you believe could benefit from hearing Carlo's message of hope. In the comments below, tell us about any experiences you have had with saint intercession, or simply share how this story has impacted your understanding of death, technology, and faith in our modern world. Your testimony could be exactly what another viewer needs to hear to open their own heart to the extraordinary ways that God continues to communicate with us, even through the digital platforms that Carlo himself would have loved. Remember his prophetic words: God can use any technology to reach hearts that are ready to receive him. May his intercession continue to bless and transform lives throughout the world, exactly as he promised it would from his place in heaven, alongside all the children who are working with him to comfort families and demonstrate that love truly is stronger than death.